Before we go deeper, notice what makes scientists just discovered why rich people think differently so misleading at first glance. Most people see the surface story and stop there. The value of this chapter is that it changes the lens, because once the frame is cleaner, the rest of the topic becomes much easier to understand honestly. Most people explain wealth differences with visible things: salary, inheritance, luck, or education. Those matter, but they do not fully explain why some people keep turning money into more money, while others keep resetting to zero. The deeper difference often starts in cognition, not IQ in the abstract, but the mental frames people use when money shows up, disappears, and asks to be allocated. That matters because the outcome usually begins before the transaction. Two people can see the same raise, the same bonus, or the same opportunity, and assign it completely different meanings. One sees relief and consumption, the other sees optionality and future leverage. By the time the spending happens, the financial result was already being shaped inside the frame each person used. What is interesting is that modern behavioral research keeps circling similar territory. People who build wealth tend to discount the future less aggressively. They are more comfortable with delayed payoff. They think in probabilities rather than certainty, and they are more likely to treat money as a tool for future control instead of present emotion. None of this sounds glamorous, but it compounds hard. It is important to say what this is not. This is not a moral hierarchy between rich and poor. Plenty of wealthy people think badly, and plenty of lower-income people think with extraordinary discipline. The point is not that money makes you wise. The point is that durable wealth often requires certain thinking patterns, and those patterns are trainable. People often hear this topic and collapse it into empty phrases, like abundance mindset or rich mindset. That language is usually too fuzzy to be useful. We need sharper categories. What exact mental habits show up more often in people who build wealth? And how do those habits change the money decisions they make every month for years? The first and probably most important difference is how people think about time. Wealthy thinkers do not just care about the amount of money. They care about the life cycle of money. What can this dollar become later? What future stress does this choice remove? What optionality does this decision build if I leave it alone long enough? That opening distinction may sound subtle, but it is doing most of the heavy lifting. Once the frame changes, the rest of the story stops feeling random. You begin to see that what looked ordinary on the surface was already shaping the financial result underneath. Now, we move from headline to mechanism. This is where the topic stops feeling like a slogan and starts behaving like a real system. Once the mechanism is visible, the later outcomes stop looking mysterious and start looking like the natural result of specific incentives and habits. One of the clearest findings in behavioral science is that people vary in how heavily they discount the future. Some people want the immediate reward so strongly that tomorrow barely matters. Others can tolerate delay because they feel the future version of themselves more vividly. Wealth often grows in the second group because compounding only rewards people who can let value mature. Research around future self-connection is especially interesting here. When people feel psychologically connected to their future self, they make better savings and investment decisions. They stop treating the future as a stranger. That sounds soft, but the effect is practical. If future you feels real, wasting your own future capital becomes harder to justify. Another major difference is opportunity cost awareness. Wealth builders are more likely to ask not only what a purchase costs, but what that capital can no longer do if spent here. The average consumer often sees the price tag and stops. The wealth-oriented thinker sees the price tag, plus the invisible alternatives that money could have financed instead. Scientists studying decision-making also find that strong operators are usually better at living with uncertainty. They do not wait for guaranteed outcomes that almost never exist. They think in probabilities. This move is likely to work over a long horizon. That move has limited downside. This system is resilient enough even if conditions change. That style of thinking is much more compatible with investing and ownership than all-or-nothing certainty seeking. Emotion is part of the science too. People often spend, save, or avoid risk based on identity protection more than logic. Richer thinkers are not emotionless, but they are often better at building systems that reduce the damage emotion can do. They automate more. They pre-decide more. They avoid putting every financial choice in direct contact with the mood of the day. Stress matters as well. When people are constantly under financial pressure, they naturally narrow into short-term survival logic. That is one reason wealth gaps reinforce themselves. Scarcity changes cognition, but once some margin exists, better thinking patterns can start compounding too. Wealth is partly about assets, but it's also about escaping the cognitive trap of permanent urgency. Once the mechanism is visible, a lot of confusing money behavior suddenly makes sense. It stops looking like chaos and starts looking like the predictable result of time horizon, incentives, and the way people position capital under pressure. This is the point where the cost becomes real. Up to now, the idea can still sound abstract, but Chapter 3 forces the issue into ordinary life. That matters because financial damage is usually underestimated until it gets translated into trade-offs, pressure, and lost future options. One of the cleanest differences is that wealthy thinkers often see money less as permission to spend and more as stored choice. Money means optionality. It means the ability to wait, negotiate, invest, relocate, pause, or say no. Once you frame money that way, certain expenses lose their emotional urgency because you start valuing preserved choice more than fast gratification. They also separate signal from noise better. A raise is signal. A recurring asset distribution is signal. A lower fixed cost base is signal. A designer purchase that impresses people for 3 weeks is mostly noise. The wealthy are not immune to vanity, but they are often more ruthless about distinguishing what changes the system from what only changes the surface. Average earners often think in events: tax refund, bonus, holiday, unexpected expense, great month, bad month. Wealth builders think more in systems: savings rate, asset allocation, runway, cash flow resilience, time horizon. Events still matter, but they are filtered through a standing architecture rather than handled as isolated drama every few weeks. This is a huge psychological edge. Rich thinkers are often willing to look boring for longer. They can delay visible proof because they are more interested in future compounding than immediate validation. That patience matters in a culture that constantly tempts people to convert progress into display long before the balance sheet is ready. Another pattern is attention to multipliers. What increases earnings capacity? What increases investable surplus? What increases time? What increases leverage without creating fragility? Rich people may not always say it this way, but they think in terms of actions that improve several parts of the system at once, instead of producing only one temporary benefit. Perhaps most importantly, they understand that avoidance is not neutral. Delaying investment, refusing to look at fixed costs, avoiding asset ownership, or staying permanently in cash all feel calm in the moment. But wealth-oriented thinkers are more likely to see the hidden cost of inaction. That single difference changes years of behavior. This is why the damage is usually larger than the headline suggests. It is rarely just a number problem. It becomes a freedom problem, a margin problem, and eventually a future options problem. That is what makes the cost so easy to ignore early and so frustrating later. At this stage, the useful move is reframe rather than blame. The goal is not to admire the problem or panic about it. The goal is to replace a weak money model with one that produces better choices consistently once real life gets involved. One common misunderstanding is that rich people must simply be born better at money. That is too simplistic and too fatalistic. Many of the patterns that support wealth can be learned: thinking in decades, asking opportunity cost questions, automating decisions, and separating short-term emotion from long-term allocation. These are practices more than personality types. Another mistake is to assume income automatically upgrades thinking. It does not. A high salary can actually protect weak money patterns for years by delaying the consequences. Someone earning well can still think in present comfort, status validation, and emotional spending. Wealth thinking is about structure, not just about the size of the fuel supply. It is equally important not to assume lower income people think poorly. Many think very well under difficult conditions. The issue is often that good thinking under pressure still needs margin, access, and time to compound. That is why wealth building is never purely psychological. Systems matter too, but thinking patterns determine what someone does once some margin finally appears. There is also a real danger in over-romanticizing mindset. Positive thinking alone does not build wealth. Systems do. Allocation does. Ownership does. Savings discipline does. But the quality of thinking determines whether people create and sustain those systems. So mindset matters, just not in the motivational poster way people usually mean. The best way to understand the difference is repetition. Rich thinking is not one big insight. It is thousands of small decisions made under a better framework. A purchase postponed, a raise allocated, a risk contained, a transfer automated, a tempting upgrade declined. Over time, repetition makes the mindset visible on the balance sheet. That should actually be encouraging. If the difference were pure talent, the topic would be depressing. But if the difference is partly trainable cognition, then the gap can narrow through better rules and better questions. That is what makes this research useful. It gives us something to practice, not just something to admire from a distance. Once the model gets cleaner, the behavior can get cleaner too. Most financial progress accelerates only after people stop asking the wrong question and start organizing money around the right one. Better framing usually arrives before better outcomes. Now the idea needs to become operational. Insight only matters if it changes what the next dollars do, what the next rule becomes, or how the system behaves the next time life gets noisy. That is where strong financial content separates itself from interesting commentary. Start with one habit. Ask future-based questions before money leaves your hands. What does this do for me 1 year from now? 5 years from now? What future stress does this remove? Or what future cash flow does it create? Rich thinking begins when the future stops being a vague concept and starts becoming a regular participant in the decision. Second, make opportunity cost visible. If you are considering a major expense, write down what the capital cannot do if you spend it there. A reserve target delayed, a debt balance not reduced, an asset purchase deferred. This is one of the fastest ways to retrain the mind from consumer logic toward wealth logic. Third, automate more. The rich often look disciplined, but behind that discipline there is usually structure. Standing transfers, recurring investments, preset buckets, clear allocation rules. Automation is powerful because it lets your better logic win before your tired brain gets a chance to interfere. Fourth, train yourself to think in probabilities. You do not need guaranteed outcomes to make strong financial moves. You need reasonable odds, good downside protection, and enough time. That mental shift alone can make investing, business decisions, and long-term planning far less emotionally chaotic. Fifth, measure what wealthy thinkers actually care about: asset growth, investable surplus, months of runway, cash flow from ownership, reduced dependence on labor. Those numbers tell you whether your mind is turning money into a system or just into temporary comfort. Better scoreboards produce better behavior. So yes, rich people often do think differently. But the useful part is not that they are mysterious. The useful part is that many of their patterns can be learned, copied, and installed. If this changed how you think about money, subscribe. We publish 3 videos every week. That's the whole WealthLogic point. Money gets easier to respect once it is organized on purpose. The people who win long-term usually are not responding better to one moment. They are running a better system every month, even when nothing dramatic seems to be happening.